I didn't fall in love the day I met him. That is the first truth I want to tell. Love did not strike like lightning, did not take my breath away or make my hands shake. There was no cinematic moment, no inner voice whispering, "This is it." What happened instead was quieter and far more dangerous. I noticed him, and then, slowly, I began to notice everything else less. At 29, my life looked stable from the outside. I had a small apartment with white walls and too many books, a job in a publishing house that paid enough to keep me calm, but not enough to make me brave, and a routine so carefully built that it protected me from disappointment. I woke up early, drank my coffee without sugar, walked the same streets, avoided unnecessary risks. I told myself this was peace. In truth, it was avoidance. I had loved once before, deeply, foolishly, with the kind of hope that assumes effort can fix everything. That love ended not in betrayal, but in erosion. Day by day, word by word, until there was nothing left to fight for. Since then, I had promised myself something simple: never love someone more than they loved me. It seemed reasonable. It was also the loneliest promise I had ever made. I first saw him on a Thursday evening in October. The city was already learning how to be cold again. Leaves gathered at the edges of sidewalks like forgotten thoughts. I had stopped at a small grocery store near my apartment, one of those places where the light is always too yellow and the music too quiet. He was standing in front of the shelves with pasta, clearly undecided. I remember thinking, absurdly, that he looked like someone who took choices seriously. He wasn't rushing, wasn't scrolling on his phone. He read labels. He frowned slightly. He put one box back, then picked another. I smiled to myself and passed by. That should have been the end of it. But when I reached the checkout, he was there again, placing his groceries carefully on the belt. I stood behind him, close enough to notice the faint smell of soap and something warm, maybe coffee, maybe home. He turned around to let someone pass and met my eyes. "Sorry," he said. Just one word. Normal, polite, unremarkable. And yet, something about the way he said it, like he meant it, made me nod and smile back. No problem. That was all. I went home, cooked dinner, read a few pages of a book I didn't finish, and went to sleep. But when I closed my eyes, I saw his hands again, steady and patient. We started seeing each other without meaning to. At the cafe near my office, where I went every Monday morning, on the bus that crossed the river at sunset, once at the bookstore where I spent too much of my salary convincing myself that owning books meant I had time to read them. We never spoke at first. We exchanged those small, polite smiles people give strangers they recognize but don't know. There was comfort in it, a strange familiarity that required no effort. I noticed details. He always wore dark coats, even when the weather allowed lighter ones. He drank his coffee black. He folded receipts instead of crumpling them. He listened when people talked, even when they weren't talking to him. I noticed these things the way you notice the weather changing, not because you're looking for signs, but because your body feels them before your mind does. The first real conversation happened by accident. The bus was late, again. People sighed, checked their phones, complained quietly into the cold air. He stood next to me at the stop, hands in his pockets, staring at the empty road. "They should stop calling this a schedule," he said, not looking at me. "It's more of a suggestion." I laughed before I could stop myself. He turned, surprised, and smiled. "I'm glad someone agrees," he said. "I was starting to think I was just impatient." "Or optimistic," I replied. "That too." We talked until the bus arrived, about nothing important: work, the weather, how cities always pretend they're organized. When the bus came, we sat separately. When I got off, I didn't look back. Still, my chest felt lighter. His name was Elias. I learned it 2 weeks later when we finally shared a table at the cafe because the place was full and neither of us wanted to stand. "I'm Elias," he said, offering his hand across the small round table. I took it. His handshake was warm, brief, respectful. He didn't hold on longer than necessary. "I'm Anna." The way he repeated my name made it sound like something worth remembering. We didn't rush. That was the most unusual part. No sudden invitations, no late-night messages. We talked when we met, and when we didn't, we lived our separate lives. And yet, something subtle was forming, a thread, thin but strong, stretching between moments. One afternoon, he asked what I did. "I work with books," I said. "Editing, mostly." "That explains a lot," he replied. I raised an eyebrow. "What exactly does it explain?" "The way you listen," he said simply, "like words matter." I had no answer for that. The first time I felt afraid was when I realized I missed him. Not dramatically, not painfully, just a small disappointment when I didn't see him where I expected to. I recognized the feeling immediately, and I didn't like it. One evening, after weeks of almosts, he asked if I wanted to walk. Not go out, not have dinner, just walk. We moved through the city slowly, side by side, our steps finding the same rhythm without discussion. We spoke about childhoods, about mistakes we didn't regret enough to change, about the strange comfort of routine. "I like walking with you," he said at one point. "It feels honest." I looked at him then, really looked. His face was calm, open, unguarded. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to win me over. He was simply there. And for the first time in years, I felt the urge to let someone stay. When we stopped in front of my building, neither of us moved. "This is me," I said eventually. "I know," he replied softly. "I've noticed." I laughed. He didn't kiss me, he didn't touch my arm, he just smiled and said goodnight. As I walked upstairs, I realized something terrifying. I trusted him, and I didn't know how to stop. Trust is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself the way fear does. Fear arrives early, loud, demanding attention. Trust slips in unnoticed, settling into habits, into expectations, into the small assumption that someone will be there tomorrow in the same gentle way they were today. That was what frightened me most. After that first walk, Elias became part of my days without formally entering my life. We didn't define anything. We didn't even talk about us. We simply continued. Coffee on Mondays, shared tables when the cafe was full, conversations that deepened not because we tried, but because silence allowed them to. I began to look forward to him in ways I pretended not to notice. I timed my breaks differently. I chose routes that passed places he might be. I told myself it was coincidences, that the city was small, that patterns emerge when you're not paying attention. I was lying again. One rainy afternoon, we sat inside the cafe longer than usual. The windows fogged up, blurring the street outside into a watercolor of umbrellas and headlights. Elias stirred his coffee slowly, watching the steam rise. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I felt my shoulders tense instinctively. "Of course." "You always seem ready to leave," he asked gently, "even when you're staying." The question surprised me, not because it was unfair, but because it was accurate. "I don't know what you mean," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He didn't argue. "It's just something I've noticed," he said, "like you're listening for the sound of an ending." I stared into my cup. "I've had practice," I admitted finally. He nodded, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed his words over and over. They followed me as I brushed my teeth, as I folded laundry, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of an ending. The truth was, I had been listening for years. I had learned to recognize the early signs, hesitation in messages, distracted eyes, affection that felt like obligation. I had trained myself to notice the moment love began to withdraw, because once I hadn't noticed until it was gone. Elias didn't do any of those things, and that made him dangerous. Our first kiss happened without ceremony. We were walking again, hands brushing occasionally, but never quite touching. The evening was cold, the sky low and heavy. We stopped under the awning of a closed shop when it began to rain harder. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if he were deciding something important. "If you don't want this," he said, "tell me now." I should have asked what this meant. Instead, I stepped closer. His kiss was slow, almost tentative, as if he were giving me time to change my mind. I didn't. I leaned into it, feeling the warmth of him, the certainty of his presence. It didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like relief. After that, things shifted, but not dramatically. We didn't become inseparable. We didn't rush into declarations. We kissed sometimes. We held hands more often. He came over once, then again. He learned how I liked my tea. I learned he couldn't sleep without a window slightly open. Intimacy grew in layers, and so did my fear. I noticed how carefully he treated my silences, how he never pushed when I withdrew, but never disappeared either. He asked questions and accepted answers, even the incomplete ones. One evening, lying beside him in my bed, listening to the rain against the glass, he traced circles on my arm absent-mindedly. "You don't talk much about your past," he said. "I talk enough," I replied. "Yes," he agreed, "but not about what hurt you." My chest tightened. "Why do you want to know?" I asked. "Because I want to know how to love you without repeating it," he said quietly. I turned toward him then, startled by the honesty. No one had ever said that to me before. I told him pieces about my previous relationship, about how love had turned into maintenance, into effort without joy, about how I had stayed too long because leaving felt like failure. I didn't tell him everything. Some wounds still felt too close to the surface. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he kissed my forehead. "That wasn't your fault," he said. I swallowed hard. It feels like it was. He didn't argue. He just held me. Sometimes that's the only way truth is allowed to exist. The first crack appeared on an ordinary day. He invited me to meet his mother, not with pressure, not with expectation. "She's important to me, and I like the idea of you knowing her." The words "important" and "you" shouldn't have frightened me as much as they did. I smiled. "I'll think about it." The look on his face was subtle, but it was there. Disappointment carefully contained. That night, I couldn't sleep. Meeting his mother meant acknowledgement. It meant reality. It meant admitting to him and to myself that this wasn't just something passing through my life. I wasn't sure I was ready for that kind of permanence. I canceled the next day, made an excuse about work, about timing, about how busy things were. He accepted it without complaint, but something shifted. Not distance, something quieter. Restraint. Days passed. We still saw each other, still talked, still touched, but there was a new carefulness in him, as if he were giving me exactly as much as I allowed, and no more. I hated myself for noticing. "You're pulling away," I said one evening, frustration slipping through. "I'm adjusting," he replied calmly, "to what you seem to want." "That's not fair," I snapped. "Neither is asking me to stay exactly where I am while you decide if I'm too close," he said. The truth stung because it was precise. I realized then that love doesn't leave because it's mistreated. Sometimes it leaves because it's kept waiting. We argued for the first time that night. Not loudly, not cruelly, but honestly. He told me he didn't need certainty, but he needed direction. I told him I was afraid of promises I couldn't keep. Words crossed between us like sharp edges, neither of us bleeding, but both aware of the risk. When he left, he kissed my cheek instead of my lips. "I'm not going anywhere," he said at the door, "but I won't chase something that's already halfway gone." After he left, I sat on the floor for a long time. I knew then that loving him would require a choice, and I had been avoiding it. The city looked different after that. Quieter, larger, as if space had opened where certainty used to be. I missed him. Not his presence, but his ease. The way things had been before I complicated them with fear. One afternoon, I walked past the grocery store where I had first seen him. I remembered the man standing in front of the pasta shelves, taking his time. I wondered when I had stopped doing that. The decision came slowly, then all at once. I showed up at his apartment unannounced, heart pounding, mind finally silent. He opened the door, surprised. "I'm sorry," I said before he could speak, "for making you feel like you were asking for too much. You weren't. I was just afraid of giving it." He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you still afraid?" he asked. "Yes," I said honestly. He smiled slightly. "Good. That means it matters." That night, I met his mother. She was kind, warm, ordinary. The world didn't end. Elias squeezed my hand under the table once, a small gesture of gratitude that felt like forgiveness. Later, lying beside him, I realized something important. Love wasn't asking me to be fearless. It was asking me to be present. The strange thing about choosing love is that it never feels finished. You don't make the decision once and then move on. You make it again and again, in small moments, in tired conversations, in the spaces where misunderstanding could easily grow. I had chosen Elias that night, standing in his doorway, heart exposed and voice steady for the first time in a long while. I didn't know then how soon that choice would be tested. Meeting his mother changed something fundamental in me. Not because she was extraordinary, she wasn't. She was warm, curious, slightly overbearing in the way mothers often are when they sense importance. She asked about my work, my family, my childhood. She smiled at Elias with a mixture of pride and relief that made my chest tighten. I realized then that loving him meant stepping into a world that existed before me, and that world had a room for me if I allowed myself to take it. For a while, things were good. Not perfect, but honest. We developed rhythms that felt like ours. Sunday mornings together, midweek dinners that turned into long conversations, disagreements that ended in understanding rather than distance. I began to leave things at his apartment without thinking about it. An extra sweater, a book, a toothbrush I pretended meant nothing. He noticed. He didn't comment. That, too, was a form of care. The offer came in early spring. Elias came to my apartment one evening looking thoughtful, almost hesitant. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped together, as if preparing for impact. "I need to tell you something," he said. I felt it immediately, that tightening in my stomach, that instinctive brace. "I've been offered a position," he continued. "It's with a firm I've admired for years. The work is meaningful, challenging." "That's amazing," I said, and I meant it. "It's in another city." The words settled between us slowly. "How far?" I asked. He replied, "Far enough that weekends won't be easy. Another country." I didn't speak. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. I had promised myself I wouldn't run again, but no promise prepares you for the reality of distance. "What do you want to do?" I asked quietly. He looked at me carefully. "I want to take it," he said, "and I want to know if you see a place for yourself in that future." There it was, the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. That night, after he left, I walked through my apartment, touching familiar things: the bookshelf, the window, the chipped mug I loved. My life felt suddenly fragile, as if it could be rearranged with one decision. I thought about my job, my routines, the safety of knowing exactly where I would be next week. I thought about Elias. Love had asked me to be present. Now it was asking me to be brave. We talked for days. Not arguments, conversations. Careful, honest, sometimes painful. We discussed logistics, timing, expectations. He never pressured me, never assumed. That somehow made the decision harder. "I don't want you to come for me," he said once. "I want you to come for yourself, if you choose to come." "What if I try and fail?" I asked. "Then we learn something, together or apart." I admired his certainty. I envied it. The truth was, I had built my life around not needing anyone too much. Elias threatened that balance, but he also offered something I had never had before: a partnership that didn't diminish me. The turning point came unexpectedly. I was at work, editing a manuscript about a woman who had lived carefully her entire life, always choosing what felt reasonable over what felt true. By the end of the book, she was alone, not unhappy, but hollow. I closed the document and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. I saw myself too clearly. That evening, I went to Elias's apartment. "I'm afraid," I said without preamble. He nodded. "I know. But I don't want to build a life where fear is the strongest voice," I continued. "I don't know what this will look like. I don't know who I'll be there, but I want to find out." His eyes softened. "Are you saying yes?" he asked. "I'm saying I want to try," I replied. He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time, I cried. Not from fear, but from release. The months that followed were a blur of preparation. I gave notice at work, packed books into boxes I labeled too carefully, said goodbye to places that had shaped me. Some people understood, some didn't. Elias was patient through it all, but I noticed something else too: a quiet pressure, not from him, but from reality. Living together in transition revealed things love alone does not. We disagreed about money, about time, about how much planning was enough. I learned he processed stress inwardly while I spoke mine aloud. Small misunderstandings grew sharp edges when exhaustion took over. One night, after a particularly difficult day, we argued about something trivial: dishes, of all things. "Why does everything feel like effort lately?" I snapped. He looked tired. "Because we're changing our lives," he said. "That's never easy." I crossed my arms. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple. It's just worth it." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure yet if I agreed. The move happened on a gray morning. We loaded our lives into a rented car, the city slowly disappearing behind us. I watched familiar streets fade and felt a surprising calm settle in. This was happening. There was no going back without loss. The new city was louder, faster, less forgiving. I didn't have a job yet. My language skills were clumsy. I felt small in ways I hadn't felt in years. Elias, on the other hand, thrived at first. New challenges, new energy, long days that left him fulfilled but exhausted. I was proud of him. I was also lonely. I spent days walking the city alone, learning its rhythms, its corners. I applied for jobs, faced rejections, smiled politely in interviews that went nowhere. At night, I told Elias I was fine. He believed me. Or maybe he wanted to. The distance between us didn't come from miles. It came from silence. I didn't want to burden him. He didn't want to pressure me. We both assumed the other was managing better than they were. Love, I was learning, doesn't break from cruelty. It breaks from unspoken weight. One evening, I finally said it. I feel like I'm disappearing, I admitted quietly. He looked at me, startled. Why didn't you tell me? Because this was your dream, I said. I didn't want to be the reason it felt heavy. He reached for my hands. You're not a weight, he said firmly. You're my reason for being here. I believed him. But belief, I learned, is not always enough. That night, lying awake, I wondered, was love meant to stretch us this far? Or was this the beginning of something quietly unraveling? This was the first part. To be continued.